Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a whirlwind tour through history, focusing on 10 landmark events that shaped the world between 1945 and 1974. By the way, this is the third installment in a series of videos about historical events. If you haven't watched the previous two, I'll leave them in the description. Buckle up, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 were a pivotal and controversial event in World War II. Well, let's dive in and find out what happened. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were the first and only uses of nuclear weapons in warfare. The bombs caused immediate and widespread devastation. The explosions created immense heat and pressure, instantly killing tens of thousands of people. Many more died from radiation sickness in the following days, weeks, and even years. Entire buildings were vaporized, and the cities were left in ruins. But it's worth noting that the decision to use atomic bombs remains a highly debated topic. Supporters argued it was necessary to force Japan's surrender and end the war quickly, potentially saving more lives overall. Critics argued the bombings were unnecessary and caused immense suffering to mostly civilian populations. The bombings marked the beginning of the nuclear age and raised serious ethical questions about the use of such weapons. The long-term health effects of radiation exposure continue to be felt by survivors and their descendants. The event serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of nuclear weapons. The establishment of the United Nations (UN) in 1945 was a significant moment in history, born out of the devastation of World War II. Let's make a closer look. World War II had caused immense destruction and suffering across the globe. The League of Nations, the previous attempt at an international organization to maintain peace, had failed to prevent the war. What was the goal? Leaders from 50 countries came together with the shared objective of preventing future world wars. They aimed to achieve this through diplomacy, fostering dialogue and peaceful resolution of conflicts between nations. International cooperation, working together on global challenges like poverty, hunger, and disease. Collective security, maintaining international peace and security through collective action. So how UN created? In April 1945, representatives met in San Francisco, California, to draft the UN Charter. The charter outlined the organization's structure, purpose, and principles. On October 24, 1945, after enough countries ratified the charter, the UN officially came into existence. Nowadays, the UN has almost every country in the world, 193 member states to date. It plays a vital role in a variety of areas, including peacekeeping and conflict resolution, humanitarian assistance and development, promotion of human rights, international law and justice, global health initiatives. Also, the UN has been criticized for bureaucracy, bias, and limited ability to enforce its decisions. The end of World War II, marked by 1945, wasn't a single event, but the culmination of several surrenders following years of brutal conflict. World War II, a global conflict lasting from 1939 to 1945, involved the vast majority of the world's countries. The war devastated Europe and parts of Asia, causing immense casualties and destruction. Nazi Germany's unconditional surrender to the Allied forces on May 8, 1945, known as Victory in Europe Day or V-Day, marked the end of the war in Europe. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945, were a significant factor that ultimately led to Japan's surrender. Japan formally surrendered to the Allied forces on September 2nd, 1945, known as Victory over Japan Day or VJ Day, officially ending the war on a global scale. The end of the war brought immense relief and celebrations across the world. However, the scars of the war were immense, with millions dead or displaced and vast areas left in ruins. The post-war period saw the rise of the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The process of rebuilding and establishing peace became a major challenge for the world. Indian independence from British rule in 1947 marked a significant turning point in both Indian and British history. Let's see what happened. The Indian independence movement was a long struggle that lasted for nearly a century. It involved various figures and movements advocating for self-rule from British colonial control. Key figures like Mahatma Gandhi emerged as leaders who employed nonviolent resistance through movements like satyagraha and civil disobedience. In 1947, the British Parliament passed the Indian Independence Act, which divided British India into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. This decision was influenced by growing religious tensions between Hindus and Muslims. The partition process was hurried and resulted in mass displacement and violence. Millions of people crossed the newly drawn borders between the two nations. August 15, 1947, marked India's official Independence Day. It was a moment of immense celebration, but also overshadowed by the ongoing violence of partition. India and Pakistan became free nations, but the scars of partition continue to influence the relationship between the two countries. Here are some other interesting points. The princely states, numerous semi-autonomous regions under British suzerainty, also played a role in the independence process by becoming part of India or Pakistan. India transformed from a dominion to a republic in 1950, adopting its constitution and establishing itself as a sovereign state. Earlier you and I talked about India's independence. One of the key figures was Mahatma Gandhi. The assassination of Mahatma Gandhi in 1948 was a shocking event that plunged India into grief and sent shockwaves around the world. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the revered leader of India's independence movement, was assassinated on January 30th, 1948. He was 78 years old. The assassin was Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who opposed Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence and his efforts to achieve religious harmony between Hindus and Muslims. The assassination took place at Birla House in New Delhi, where Gandhi was staying at the time. Godse approached Gandhi during a prayer meeting and shot him 3 times at close range. Gandhi died almost instantly. The assassination sparked outrage and violence across India, particularly against Hindus. Godse was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. He was hanged in November 1948. Gandhi's assassination was a major loss for India. He was seen as the father of the nation, and his death cast a shadow over the country's newfound independence. The event highlighted the religious tensions that had led to the partition of India in 1947. It's important to note that this was not the first attempt on Gandhi's life. There had been an unsuccessful attempt just days before. Godse's motives were complex and stemmed from his belief that Gandhi's policies appeased Muslims and weakened India. Despite his death, Gandhi's legacy of nonviolent resistance continues to inspire people around the world. Let's move from India to events in Korea in 1950. The Korean War, which began in 1950, was a bloody conflict that marked a significant moment in Cold War tensions. What was the spark that ignited the war? On June 25, 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and communist ideology, launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea. After the end of World War II, The Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel, with the north under communist rule and the south under the US-backed government. The conflict became even wider. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, intervened in the conflict on behalf of South Korea under the auspices of the United Nations. Other UN member states also contributed troops. China, North Korea's ally, entered the war in late 1950, pushing back UN forces. The war became a bloody stalemate with heavy casualties on both sides. The Korean War ended in an armistice in 1953, leaving the Korean peninsula divided by the heavily fortified Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, along roughly the same lines as before the war. The Korean War highlighted the deep ideological divide between the US-led West and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It also left Korea a divided nation with ongoing tensions. The Korean War is sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War because it overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War. The war had a devastating impact on Korea, causing widespread destruction and civilian casualties. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was a tense 13-day period where the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Let's explore some key moments. Where it all began. The Soviet Union, feeling threatened by US nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, decided to place the same missiles in Cuba, a communist island nation just 90 miles off the US coast. In October 1962, US spy planes recorded photographs of missile sites under construction. President of the U.S. John Fitzgerald Kennedy imposed a naval blockade on Cuba to prevent further Soviet military supplies from reaching the island. This was a very serious action, as it could be seen as an act of war by the Soviets. The U.S. also demanded the removal of the existing missiles. The world watched anxiously as both superpowers engaged in tense diplomatic exchanges. After a series of secret communications, a back-channel deal was reached. The Soviets agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. public pledge not to invade Cuba and a secret agreement to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey, which later happened. The crisis ended on October 28, 1962, marking a significant turning point in Cold War tensions. It highlighted the dangers of nuclear proliferation and the importance of communication and crisis management to prevent war. The Cuban Missile Crisis is considered the moment when the Cold War came closest to escalating into a full-scale nuclear conflict. The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy on November 22, 1963, was a pivotal and tragic moment in American history. President John F. Kennedy was fatally shot while riding in an open-top limousine in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald, a former U.S. Marine and recent defector to the Soviet Union, fired the shots from a nearby building depository. Texas Governor John Connally, who was also in the limousine, was wounded in the attack. President Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but doctors were unable to save him. His death plunged the nation into mourning. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested shortly after the shooting, but was himself shot and killed by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, live on television before facing trial. The Warren Commission, a government commission established to investigate the assassination, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. However, the circumstances surrounding the assassination, including the location of the shots and Oswald's background, have fueled numerous conspiracy theories questioning the lone gunman conclusion. John F. Kennedy's assassination remains a defining moment in American history. It marked the end of an era of optimism and idealism associated with his presidency. The event continues to be a subject of fascination and debate, with lingering questions about the motives and circumstances. Okay, Let's move on to the monumental achievement. The Apollo 11 mission in July 1969 was a big moment, marking the first time humans set foot on the moon. It was a culmination of years of scientific advancements and a giant leap for humanity in space exploration. Launched on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was the fifth crewed mission in NASA's Apollo program. The crew consisted of 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, mission commander, first person to walk on the moon; Buzz Aldrin, lunar module pilot, second person to walk on the moon; Michael Collins, command module pilot, remained in lunar orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin explored the surface. The spacecraft consisted of 3 parts: Saturn V launch vehicle, the most powerful rocket ever built at the time, responsible for propelling the entire spacecraft out of Earth's orbit; Command Module, CM, living quarters for the astronauts during the entire mission, containing the control center for the mission; Lunar Module, LM, nicknamed Eagle, landed on the lunar surface and housed the astronauts during their moonwalk. On July 20th, 1969, after a 4-day journey, the lunar module Eagle with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended onto the lunar surface in the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong famously uttered the words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," as he became the first human to step onto the moon's surface. Aldrin joined him shortly thereafter. The astronauts spent about 21 hours on the moon, collecting samples, conducting experiments, and planting an American flag. After a successful lunar stay, the Eagle's ascent stage blasted off from the moon, rejoining Michael Collins in the command module. All 3 astronauts safely returned to Earth on July 24, 1969, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. The Apollo 11 mission marked a significant victory in the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. More importantly, it opened doors for further exploration of the moon and ignited human dreams of space travel. The Watergate Scandal, which unfolded from 1972 to 1974, was a major political scandal that shook the United States government and led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. It all began on June 17, 1972, when 5 men were arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee, DNC, headquarters located in the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. These men weren't ordinary criminals. They were connected to officials in President Nixon's re-election campaign, raising suspicions of a potential cover-up. Instead of a transparent investigation, the Nixon administration tried to conceal their involvement in the break-in. This included attempts to obstruct the investigation, tamper with evidence, and silence whistleblowers. The Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, dubbed Deep Throat by a confidential source, relentlessly pursued the story, uncovering a web of lies and deceit. Interesting that congressional hearings televised live across the nation revealed the extent of the cover-up, exposing the involvement of high-ranking Nixon administration officials. Public trust in the government plummeted as evidence mounted against President Nixon himself. Facing impeachment by Congress and mounting pressure to resign, President Nixon announced his resignation on August 8, 1974, becoming the only U.S. president to do so. The Watergate scandal exposed the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of a free press in holding those in power accountable. It led to reforms to strengthen checks and balances within the U.S. government. The term Watergate has become synonymous with political scandal and corruption. Well, that was a whirlwind tour through history. These 10 events significantly impacted the world we live in today. I would also like to make it clear that this is not the last video in the series on historical events, because we have a lot more to discuss. Let me know in the comments below which event you find most interesting and why. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more historical deep dives.